A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
John was standing with two of his disciples, and as he watched Jesus walk by, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard what he said and followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following him and said to them, "What are you looking for?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and you will see." So they went and saw where Jesus was staying, and they stayed with him that day. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was one of the two who heard John and followed Jesus. He first found his own brother Simon and told him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated Christ. Then he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
"I hope you don't take it personally, Father," an embarrassed woman said to the priest after Mass, "when my husband walked out during your sermon." "Oh, I didn't even notice," the priest replied. "It's not anything you said," insisted the woman. "Arthur has been walking in his sleep ever since he was a child." That man wasn't the first to fall asleep in church. Even in the Old Testament today, we hear the story of young Samuel who served in the temple every day and fell asleep there every night. He was so sleepy that he almost missed the voice of the Lord calling to him, "Samuel, Samuel." I'm sure I would have missed the Lord's call completely. I can sleep through anything, especially my alarm clock. It is the priest Eli who has to point out to Samuel that it might be God who is calling him. Eli even tells Samuel how to reply, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Falling asleep in the presence of the Lord is certainly never a good thing. Think of the apostles falling asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane the night Jesus was arrested, dozing off at a critical moment, not even able to stay up a single hour with him. Think of the story in the New Testament of a man who was sitting in a window listening to St. Paul preach when he dozed off, fell out, and killed himself. Now that was a boring sermon. My friend Father Sean was driving up to go skiing here about a month ago, and he got a late start. He was driving up late at night after a long day, and he described how he kept nodding off and drifting off into the wrong lane of traffic as he drove up. It was all he could do to keep his eyes open. He made it to Twin Mountain and had to pull over in the parking lot of St. Patrick's and take a nap before he continued on his way. So often that is the way that we feel in life, isn't it? As if we're drifting off, walking in our sleep, preoccupied with our own concerns, bored with the monotony of daily life, not paying attention to the presence of God and the people and events all around us. Like the first disciples in today's gospel, we are too sleepy to recognize Jesus when he is there, when he is calling us. Those first disciples didn't recognize Jesus until John the Baptist pointed him out to them, shook them awake with his famous call, "Behold, there is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Hindsight is always 20/20, so when we look back at our lives, we can always see how God has been there, shaping our lives, watching over us, caring for us. But when we're in the middle of a trial or a difficulty, it is sometimes a lot harder to see that. We are too often out of it, too anxious about too many things. When we buy a puzzle at a store, we trust that all the pieces will be there if we try to put it together. Why do we have such a hard time believing that God has a plan for our lives? That He knows how all those pieces of our life, however jagged, will fit together to create a beautiful picture? Fortunately, there are people along the way who, like Eli and John the Baptist, will remind us from time to time that God is there. Something very similar happens, I think, with young men who are called to the priesthood. Every seminarian I have ever spoken to has some story about how some point in their life they were awakened to the possibility of a vocation. They were asked by their pastor or a friend at church if they ever considered being a priest. These people pointed out to them what they might not have considered themselves, that God might be calling them to the priesthood. The seminarian brochure that is in the bulletin this week has pictures of 9 such men studying for our diocese, and it's a reminder of our need as a church to foster vocations. We need priests. I think we may be in for a rude awakening in the future as we realize that priests don't just happen by magic. There is no one automatically available to fill the place of a priest who is retired or gets sick. Vocations have to be fostered and cherished in our parish and in our families. Our youth have to be awakened to the possibility of serving God and serving the church, and have to hear and respond to the voice of the Lord calling them. We have to pray for them. I can think in my own life how my grandparents would often bring me to daily Mass, especially during Lent before school. People in my parish would encourage me to think about being a priest. That encouragement really helped me to see God's call in my life. I can remember, too, once being an altar server as a young kid, and I remember my pastor once took off his vestment after Mass and put it on me and said, "Hey, that fits pretty well." That was perhaps a little pushy, but I got the point across. So I encourage you not to be afraid of asking young men, if they have considered a vocation to the priesthood. Like Eli and John the Baptist, you might be helping them to see the call of God in their life. Please never stop praying for vocations as well, and pray for the seminarians of our diocese who are discerning God's will. The same is true of all of us. Whatever our vocation, the Lord is calling us daily to follow Him. Are we awake enough to listen? Do we say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening"?